Tell me a little bit about some of the first conversations that, in your mind, seeded the idea of the Freedom Caucus.
Well, it really gets back, we all have nicknames for different bills and different processes here. We were actually voting on an area, on a bill called the Omnibus. So we're in the season right now on whether it's going to be a CR or an omnibus. Well, this was a creative one in that we were doing a CR for part of it and an omnibus or a minibus. We called it the Omnibus, the CR on the front of a bus. And yet at the same time, many of us conservatives called it the crummy bus because they were putting all kinds of stuff in there that just didn't really make any sense. And so there was a rule on that. I can remember I was on the House floor talking to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Hal Rogers, the member from Kentucky. And as the chairman was there, they were voting on the rule. Well, I look up, he looks up, and this rule, it may not pass. And it was all of a sudden, there was panic on the floor and it's going every different direction. Well, a number of the conservatives had voted a different way on that rule. In fact, if all the conservatives had gotten together, that rule would not have passed. I went to a good friend of mine, Congressman Jim Jordan. Jim and I are close personal friends, and said, listen, if we're going to lose in an organized fashion. Let's get together. Let's create a group of people that are willing to vote as a block and vote together. He got 4 names. I got 4 names. We made those phone calls. And so the founding members, there was 9 founding members of the House Freedom Caucus, but it came from a vote on which we didn't prevail. But we saw an opportunity to kind of band together and make a difference and create leverage points. And so a lot of that actually happened in 2014-15. And many people think the House Freedom Caucus has been around for decades, but we're not even coming up on our 10-year anniversary yet.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's been around the entire time I've been paying attention to politics, so it may as well have existed for 50 years. Obviously, one of the most famous things that the House Freedom Caucus helped cause, and you specifically helped cause, was the removal of John Boehner as the Speaker of the House. Just real quick, how'd that work? How'd you manage to completely change the presidential line of succession?
Well, I can tell you that it's not something that I talk about on a regular basis. And it had nothing to do with John Boehner as a person. It had really to do with more this infrastructure that was there that put so much power in one person's hands. I was looking for what one member could do. And so I was going through the Jefferson Manual looking at privileged motions. And at that time, was just really frustrated. I felt like, well, gosh, here I gave up a great career to come and serve in Congress. I'm not planning to serve more than 3 or 4 terms. I'm not going to be here long enough to make a difference. And yet we've got to figure out a way to send a clear message. And, when anybody stands up for their people back home, this town, and specifically many in leadership, will start to really put a vice grip on the jugular veins of members of Congress, trying to get them to actually just become part of the establishment. And so I found this little known motion to vacate. I think I Googled it, and there was only a couple of references to motion to vacate the chair on Google.
Just on that, how many members that you were serving with at the time do you think had ever looked into parliamentary procedure with the level of detail that you were looking into?
Well, I don't know that any had at that time, because now everybody's talking about the motion to vacate. Like I say, one of the things that they're wanting to put forth is actually to put that back in the rules. It had been there for 100 years, had only been used in 1928 by Joe Cannon, of whom the Cannon office buildings are named after.
You think there's going to be a Meadows office building one day?
No, nor do I want one. But I can say Joe Cannon was there. He used it it to really do a vote of confidence. So he had put it forward basically saying, are you guys with me or not? And it put everybody on record as having to be for Joe Cannon. He was the speaker at that particular time. Interestingly enough, he was gone in less than 2 years. But that being said, I came up with this little known fact. Thomas Massey actually worked on helping me perfect it. I figured that my name was going to have to be the only name on it, but Thomas behind the scenes was helping me make sure that it was efficient with its words. Let's put it that way.
And he's a smart cookie.
He's a real smart cookie. I mean, hey, listen, I don't know that your listeners would know this, but he actually owns more patents than any other member of Congress, 31 and counting. When I served with him originally, he sat right next to me. We came in about the same time. He actually had 29 patents, and so I bumped it up to 30, and he goes, "No, I'm up to 31." So 31 and counting. But real smart guy. But also, what I love about Thomas is that he doesn't take himself too serious. That's one of the problems with many members of Congress. They take themselves far too serious, and he's got a great sense of humor, a great mind, and on that particular time was very helpful in coming up with just a very 2-page motion to vacate the chair. When I filed it and put it in the hopper, we didn't even actually end up voting on it, but the minute I put it in the hopper, I mean, it was like ants all over the House floor. It was unheard of, historic, and yet at the same time, hopefully something that only gets used extremely, extremely rare.
So you do that. How did Washington react to you the day after? I mean, you were already a troublemaker. You were an active member, which that alone puts you in a top decile if you do anything at all in this town, as opposed to just drink beer and go to fancy dinners. And then you did that. What was it like? Again, I'm curious about the sociology of it. How were you treated?
It wasn't a fun day. I still remember it was July 28th of 2015 when I put it in. I think the headline was Meadows' Army of One. It was a lot of my colleagues really upset, even members of the Freedom Caucus. I had a few members of the Freedom Caucus that wanted to throw me out of the very group that I'd helped found, because fighting for something you believe in is not necessarily something that is encouraged in this town. You get paid based on words, a lot of rhetoric, but very little action. For me, it's all about you have to take the action to make it happen. And so there were a lot more people willing to own up to it and say they embraced it 59 days later when John Boehner resigned. But on day one, day two, it was I think, let me just share this. We had a conference there, and at one time, I was sitting in the back where I normally sit, and I mean, there was no one else around me. And
you're radioactive.
Yeah, and I share this story. It may have not been that particular day, but it's indicative when you are radioactive. And Jim Jordan comes in. He says, "Oh, Mark, you're sitting with all your friends." And that was, Jim was always one that was willing to stand with me, even if he didn't necessarily agree on the tactic, and that for that I'm forever grateful.
The class that you came in on was elected during this Tea Party wave.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about what that dynamics were. What did the set of members that you were elected with feel like? Did you guys feel like a cadre, like a class of people taking the city on? Did that take time? Walk me through that.
Yeah, so a little bit of that. Interestingly enough, there was really two different waves, a 210 and a 212 wave of, quote, Tea Party conservatives. And it felt like taking on the Washington establishment. We thought we were coming just to provide reinforcements for that class that had gone before us. But interestingly enough, by the time you're here 2 years, how you campaign and how you actually conduct yourself here in Washington, D.C. from a conservative value standpoint, sometimes they're mutually exclusive. Let's just put it that way. And so there was really a reinforcement, but it was more a function of, we keep saying we're going to cut spending. We keep saying we're going to prioritize conservative values, and yet we're not doing it. In fact, the common thing they would say is, let's live to fight another day. Well,
who's killing you?
Well, I can tell you it's the Washington establishment that kills you, but the other is there's never a fight. And I think that's what the American people, they want a fight legislatively, obviously, is what I'm talking about, but they want to make sure that their priorities are represented in Washington, D.C. And so for me, it meant those North Carolina values were represented here, not D.C. values represented back home in North Carolina.